In the midst of the silent, broken ruins of a once glorious empire, the air is heavy with the weight of lost grandeur. These remnants, crumbling beneath the relentless march of time, whisper of a civilization that bent the very earth to its will, only to be undone by its own hubris. Imagine for a moment a solitary figure, a poet, wandering through these forgotten halls. The stones, worn and cracked, echo with the ghosts of a time long past. But what remains? What is left when the hands that built this empire are no more? What happens when the walls of a once mighty fortress, built to stand against the ages, now lie in ruin? This is the story of Roman Britain, a land that rose under the banner of Rome, a world forged by the sweat and blood of thousands, and a civilization whose light once shone bright across the darkened edges of the known world. Yet just as quickly as it rose, it fell. Its glory reduced to rubble, its cities left to crumble into the earth like forgotten dreams. Empires, historical, welcomes you to explore this moment in time. The end of Roman Britain is not just a tale of armies, generals, and empires. It is the tragic reminder of the fleeting nature of all things, the impermanence that haunts every empire, no matter how powerful. As we walk through the echoing ruins together, allow yourself to be drawn into a reflection on the fragility of the world and the inevitable march of time that we all must face. The very bones of Roman Britain lie in the landscape itself, etched into the soil. The story begins not with the clash of steel, but with a poet, long lost to history. A poet who, having wandered through the ruin of a city that once basked in the opulence of Roman rule, would capture in verse the agony of its fall. This poet's identity is a mystery, his name forgotten, his face erased by time. Yet, the words he wrote endure, like the crumbling stone beneath his feet. What was it like to stand amid such grandeur, now reduced to rubble? What thoughts raced through his mind as he gazed upon the remnants of the baths where men of Rome once bathed in luxury, now silent and still, save for the whisper of time? He wrote of the ruin, the decay, the silence. He wrote of walls that once stood tall and proud, now shattered and worn. Of towers that had reached for the sky, now broken and tumbled to the earth. And in his words, you can almost hear the sadness, the wonder, and the fear. The fear of witnessing something magnificent crumble, something that had once been invincible, reduced to nothing more than a memory. The poem, titled The Ruin, captures the essence of Roman Britain, but it also encapsulates something much larger, a theme as old as time itself. The theme of loss, the theme of inevitable decline. The poet, amidst the rubble, could not help but wonder, who built this place? How did they craft such wonders? How did they shape the very land itself to fit their designs, to create cities, monuments, and roads that would stretch across an empire? Yet in the end, those very same creations would be left behind, abandoned, as though the hands that shaped them had simply vanished into the wind. It is a haunting thought that something so grand could fall, not with a bang, but with the quiet, inevitable erosion of time. The empire's heartbeat slowed, its once stalwart legions withdrew, leaving only the ghosts of a civilization that once ruled the known world. As the centuries passed, those who stood where Rome had once stood could only look upon the ruins and ask, why? Why did this great civilization, with all its might, its power, its vision, fall to dust? To truly understand the fall of Roman Britain, we must rewind the clock, back to a time when the Roman Empire was at its height. A time when Rome was not just an empire, it was the empire. It was a force that stretched across the known world, conquering, shaping, and dominating every land it touched. From the deserts of North Africa to the frozen lands of Germania, the Roman eagle soared high, casting its shadow over all beneath it. The empire was vast, and its reach was long. It seemed invincible. Yet, in the shadows of this towering might, there were whispers. Whispers of a distant land, an island at the edge of the known world, beyond the reach of Rome's grasp. This was Britain, a place where wild tribes lived, unbowed, unconquered. To the Romans, Britain was a mystery, a land that seemed to exist only in the realms of legend, a land of giants and warriors who painted their bodies with strange markings, whose hair flowed like rivers in the wind. And beyond the legends, there was the sea, the unpredictable, violent waters of the North Sea and the English Channel, which stood as a barrier between Rome and the mysterious island. Julius Caesar, ever the ambitious leader, first turned his gaze upon Britain in 55 BC. Twice he attempted to conquer the island, twice he failed. His legions waded through marshes, fought through thick forests, and yet, after all that, Caesar found little more than frustration. The land was wild, untamed, and the resistance fierce. Despite his best efforts, Britain resisted. And so, Caesar left, but the seed had been planted. The island, once thought to be a legend, had now become a prize that Rome would not abandon. But it would not be Caesar who would conquer Britain. It would be Emperor Claudius, a man who, unlike his predecessors, would not let the island slip through his fingers. In 43 AD, Claudius dispatched 4 legions to the shores of Britain, marking the beginning of Rome's enduring presence on the island. The invasion was swift and brutal. The Britons, led by their chieftains, put up a valiant fight, but in the end, they could not withstand the might of Rome. They were driven back, their forces shattered, their lands claimed. The Romans built cities, established forts, and began to spread their influence across the land. Yet even as the Romans claimed victory, they were not prepared for what lay ahead. The land of Britain, though conquered, was never truly subdued. There were uprisings, revolts, and constant resistance from the native Britons. The Romans may have controlled the land, but the people never fully accepted them. This was a land that did not bend easily to Roman rule. The foundations of Roman Britain were laid, but the cracks were already beginning to show. With every victory, there were signs of strain. The Romans would build their cities, their walls, their baths, but would they be able to hold on to them? Could the empire, which had stretched its reach so far, really keep control over such a distant and unruly province? If you're enjoying this deep dive into history and the rise and fall of empires, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Empires Historical. Your support helps us create more content that brings the past to life, one empire at a time. We've got much more in store, so hit that subscribe button and stay with us as we unravel the stories of lost civilizations. As the years passed, the empire tightened its grip on Britain. Cities like London, Colchester, and Bath rose from the earth, their grand architecture reflecting the might of Rome. The Romans brought with them a new world, a world of order, of roads, of cities. The land was reshaped by their hands, as if they could mold nature itself to fit their vision. The sprawling villas with underfloor heating, the monumental forums, the grand baths, they were not merely buildings. They were symbols of Roman power, of a civilization that had conquered time itself. Yet, as the years wore on, it became clear that all empires, no matter how mighty, are subject to the cruel passage of time. For nearly 400 years, Britain stood as a Roman province, a jewel in the empire's crown. But it was a jewel that began to tarnish, its gleam dimming with each passing generation. The question lingered in the air like an unanswered prayer. How long could Rome keep this distant, unruly province under its control? The answer, as history would show, was not much longer. By the time the 2nd century came to a close, the signs of decline were evident. The empire, already stretched thin by wars on multiple fronts, could no longer afford to maintain the large garrisons in Britain. The cost of keeping Roman soldiers stationed on the island far from the heart of the empire was too great. The emperor's coffers grew emptier, and the empire began to bleed. In this fragile state, Britain's fate was sealed by a bitter irony. Its own defenders would be its undoing. The generals, the very men tasked with defending the empire, began to see an opportunity. The military might that had been sent to Britain to secure Roman rule was now a force that could be used to seize power in Rome itself. The province, with its massive garrisons, became a breeding ground for rebellion. The men who commanded these legions grew increasingly powerful, and with power came ambition. The first of these ambitious men was Claudius Albinus, a Roman general stationed in Britain. Born in North Africa, Albinus had risen through the ranks of the Roman military. He was a man of great physical stature, with pale skin that set him apart from his men, a man with great ambition. When the Emperor Commodus was assassinated in 192 AD, the Roman Empire descended into chaos. With no clear successor, several men staked their claim to the throne, each vying for the power that was now up for grabs. Albinus, stationed in Britain with a legion at his command, saw his moment to strike. In a bold and unprecedented move, Albinus declared himself emperor, rallying his troops to his cause. With his legions loyal to him, he marched across the sea to Gaul, hoping to challenge the emperor in Rome. But the gamble did not pay off. Despite initially securing some victories, Albinus was defeated in 197 AD at the Battle of Lugdunum. The battle was bloody and prolonged, and although Albinus had a brief moment of hope, in the end, the tide turned against him. As his forces fled, Albinus took his own life, ending his bid for power. Yet, the damage had already been done. Albinus's rebellion, though unsuccessful, left Britain vulnerable. His departure had left the province without its protective legions, and in the power vacuum that followed, Britain descended into anarchy. The economy, once thriving on the Roman trade network, began to collapse. The cities that had once flourished now stood empty and decaying. The roads that connected the empire were now silent. The only sound, the rustling of leaves and the distant call of wild animals. In the absence of Roman authority, local tribes and invaders began to carve out their territories. The Saxons, the Picts, and the Scots, once distant threats, now became pressing dangers. The once imperial roads were no longer safe as marauding bands of invaders descended upon Britain. With no Roman legions to defend them, the cities were left to fend for themselves. London, the once thriving metropolis, fell into ruin. The great forum that had once been the heart of Roman Britain was dismantled, its stones repurposed for other buildings. The baths, once places of leisure and luxury, were left to rot. The citizens of the once great Roman cities now lived in fear as the Saxons and Picts ravaged the countryside. The Roman presence in Britain was slowly, inexorably, coming to an end. As the 4th century wore on, the empire's grip on Britain weakened further. The last of the great Roman emperors, Constantine the Great, would briefly restore order, but by then, it was already too late. The empire had begun to fracture. Internal strife, political instability, and external threats from barbarian tribes weakened Rome's ability to maintain its hold on its farthest reaches. The fall of Roman Britain was not a single event, but the culmination of centuries of decline, each failure, each retreat, each loss of power, inching the empire closer to its end. In the year 410 AD, the final blow was struck. Rome, beset by its own troubles, withdrew its last forces from Britain. The empire's once mighty legions, which had protected the province for nearly 4 centuries, were gone. The final remnants of Roman Britain were abandoned, left to the mercy of the invading barbarian tribes. And so, the once proud province of Roman Britain fell into the Dark Ages. The cities were left to decay. The grand villas and bathhouses crumbled into ruins. The people, abandoned by their Roman masters, would be left to fend for themselves in a world now ruled by the sword. The buildings, the roads, the monuments to Roman might, each one a silent testament to the fragility of empire, the transience of power, and the inevitability of time. As the poet of the ruins so eloquently captured in his verse, the ruins of Roman Britain stand not just as physical remnants of a bygone age, but as symbols of all that is lost in the passage of time. The marble of eternity, once so proud, now lies shattered. The towering buildings that reach for the heavens now lie broken. Their once vibrant colors faded. The people of Rome, who once ruled the land, are now ghosts, their legacy reduced to rubble. It is a haunting thought that something so magnificent, so powerful, could be reduced to dust. But in this is the lesson of history, that all empires, no matter how mighty, are bound by the same fate. They rise, they shine, and then they fall. And when they fall, all that remains is the ruin. The morning light casts long shadows over the remnants of what once was. The road that once stretched from Londinium to the farthest reaches of the Roman world is now just an overgrown path, trodden only by the wind. The aqueducts, which carried the lifeblood of the empire, water, now lie shattered, their arches broken, their stone blocks weathered by centuries of neglect. The voices of merchants, soldiers, and citizens who once thrived within the grand walls of these cities have long since faded, leaving only echoes. These cities, so carefully constructed with the strength of Rome's will, now stand silent, their towering walls crumbling under the relentless weight of time. In the dust of these abandoned streets, we can almost hear the faint murmurs of those who once walked here. Their footsteps, now long gone, were once filled with the promise of civilization, the promise of eternal glory. The marble floors, the intricate mosaics, and the grand bathhouses were not merely spaces of leisure. They were symbols of an empire that believed it could never fall. But now, those symbols are shattered. They stand as monuments not to the triumph of Rome, but to its inevitable decay. And so it was that the great empire, once the beacon of power, glory, and order, began to crumble from within. It was not an event of a single day, nor even a single battle, but a slow and painful decline, like the fading light of a dying star. The cracks in the foundation of Roman Britain had been forming for centuries, unnoticed, ignored by those who thought their power would last forever. But in the end, it became clear, no empire, no matter how mighty, could withstand the passage of time forever. The Roman legions, which had once swept across Britain with the force of a hurricane, now found themselves stretched thin. As the empire expanded, so too did its needs. The demands for soldiers, resources, and attention grew ever greater, and Britain, though still a vital outpost, was left to fend for itself. The once vibrant cities, brimming with the hustle of Roman life, now lay in quiet decay, their streets empty, and their buildings forgotten. Britain was no longer a shining jewel in the crown of Rome. It was a burden. The legions that had once protected the province were recalled to more pressing fronts, as the empire grappled with threats from beyond its borders. The northern frontier, which had once been guarded by the might of Hadrian's wall, was left vulnerable. And as the legions withdrew, The barbarian tribes, Saxon raiders, Pictish warriors, and Scots began to encroach upon the land that Rome had once claimed as its own. It was in this time of uncertainty of a world in flux that the first signs of the empire's unraveling began to show. As the legions departed, so too did the confidence of the Roman people in their empire. The sense of invincibility that had once gripped the hearts of those who lived under Roman rule began to fade. The power that had once seemed eternal was now fragile, as brittle as the ruins that dotted the landscape. And then came the generals, men of ambition, men of vision, and men of folly. These were the men who would seal the fate of Roman Britain, for they were the ones who would choose to abandon their post, to forsake their duty in pursuit of greater power. They were the ones who saw in the weakness of Rome an opportunity to seize the throne, and in doing so, they abandoned the very empire they had sworn to protect. The first of these was Claudius Albinus, a man born far from the imperial heartland, in the deserts of North Africa. He rose through the ranks of the Roman military, his name becoming known for his skill and cunning. But Albinus, like so many before him, sought more than the titles of general or governor. He sought the throne of Rome itself. When the Emperor Commodus was assassinated in 192 AD, the empire was thrown into chaos. A power vacuum opened up, and many saw an opportunity to claim the title of emperor. Albinus, stationed in Britain, gathered his legions, declaring himself emperor and marching toward Rome. For a time, it seemed that he might succeed, as the people of Gaul rallied to his cause. But in the end, it was not to be. Albinus was defeated at the Battle of Lugdunum, his forces shattered, and his life ended by his own hand. Yet, his brief rebellion left Britain exposed, for the legions that had once defended the province were now gone. With no protection, the land began to fall into disarray. The cities were abandoned, their once great walls crumbling to dust. The roads, once lined with the marching feet of Roman soldiers, now lay empty. And with the departure of Rome's soldiers came the departure of its authority. The people of Britain were left to fend for themselves, their once vibrant world now slipping into a new and terrifying darkness. In the years that followed, the raids of the Saxons, Picts, and Scots became ever more frequent. Their raids on the coastal towns and villages growing bolder with each passing year. The once secure borders of the Roman Empire had vanished, and with it, the sense of order and safety that the Roman presence had provided. But the invaders were not the only force at work, for as the Romans withdrew, so too did the very essence of Roman life. The great villas, once the pride of the elite, began to decay. The walls that had been built to last for centuries now stood as hollow shells, a shadow of the glory that once was. The public baths, which had once been a place of leisure and socialization, became overgrown with weeds, their marble floors cracked and broken. The people of Britain, no longer under the watchful eye of the empire, had to adapt. The Roman way of life, with its grand villas, its luxurious baths, and its bustling cities, was slowly forgotten. The people, once part of a mighty empire, found themselves drifting further and further away from the legacy of Rome. The roads were no longer used for the grand trade of empire, but became paths for local farmers and villagers who made do with what they had. And yet, despite the decay, despite the collapse, the legacy of Rome remained. The roads, though cracked and weathered, still marked the landscape, a reminder of the empire's once great reach. The ruins of Roman Britain, though fading into the earth, still carried the memory of the empire's grandeur. In every broken wall, in every shattered column, there was a trace of the once great civilization that had built it. It was a civilization that had been built upon the blood of brothers, upon the strength of men who dreamed of an empire that would last forever. But from that blood came order. From order came the rise of the Roman Empire, and from its rise came the inevitable fall. The empire, once so mighty, so indomitable, could not withstand the passage of time. It was a story of glory and ruin, of triumph and tragedy. It is the story of all empires, for in the rise and fall of Rome, we see the reflection of our own world, and the knowledge that all things, no matter how great, must one day fall. With the withdrawal of Roman legions, Britain began its slow descent into a world of chaos. No longer sheltered beneath the mighty Roman eagle, the once flourishing cities fell into disrepair. London, once a bustling metropolis, became a shadow of its former self. The grand forum where officials once debated and decreed the laws of the empire now lay silent, its once polished marble now cracked and overgrown with ivy. The bustling marketplaces where traders from across the empire had once sold spices, silks, and pottery now lay empty, with only the echoes of the past remaining to haunt the streets. As the legions departed, Britain became a land defined by fear and uncertainty. The great roads that had connected the cities of the empire, designed to carry trade and legions alike, now led to nowhere. The infrastructure, built to last for centuries, was now deteriorating before the very eyes of those who had once relied on it. The grandeur of Roman Britain was slipping away, leaving behind only the debris of a civilization that had once shaped the world. The roads, still paved with the stone of Roman hands, were now nothing more than pathways for local villagers, who struggled to survive in a land without its former order. The once proud towns became hollowed-out shells, haunted by the ghosts of a time long past. The mighty Hadrian's Wall, which had once stood as the boundary between Roman-controlled Britain and the wild lands of the north, began to crumble. Its stones, once carefully placed to defend the empire's frontier, were now scavenged by those who needed to rebuild their own homes. The forts that had housed Roman soldiers were abandoned, left to rot in the harsh winds of the northern frontier. In their place, new, more rudimentary structures rose, built by the local tribes that had once been subjugated by Roman might. Yet, despite the destruction, the Roman legacy could still be felt. The people of Britain, though now living in a world far removed from the grandeur of Rome, still bore the marks of the empire's influence. The ruins of Roman architecture remained, standing as silent witnesses to the empire's once immense power. The Roman way of life, though fading, had left an indelible mark on the people of Britain. They had learned the ways of engineering, of building, and of governance. Even as their cities fell into ruin, the people carried with them the knowledge and skills passed down from their Roman masters. But as time passed, even these remnants of Roman influence began to fade. The people of Britain, once bound by the structure of Roman law and order, now found themselves lost in a world without those guiding principles. The once vibrant cities, where people had lived in relative peace under Roman rule, were now overrun by tribal factions and warring bands. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace that had once held the empire together, was now a distant memory. Britain, once the heart of a vast empire, was now a land of anarchy and confusion. The people of Britain, now left to their own devices, were forced to return to older ways of life. The roads, once used for the swift movement of Roman legions, were now paths for wandering tribes and scavengers. The great villas and houses built by Roman aristocrats were abandoned, their marble floors cracked, and their painted walls faded. The public baths, once a symbol of Roman luxury and leisure, were left to decay, their heated pools now stagnant and cold. Yet even in this decay, there was a certain beauty. The ruins, though weathered by time, still held within them a sense of grandeur, a reminder of what had once been. The columns that once supported the grand public buildings of Londinium now stood as hollow monuments, their marble veins worn by the passage of time. The walls that had once stood as the boundary of the Roman Empire now lay crumbled, their stones scattered across the fields, like forgotten pieces of a puzzle that no one would ever complete. The ruins of Roman Britain, though abandoned and forgotten, still whispered of a time when the world had bent to the will of one city. The loss of Roman Britain was not just a physical one, it was a loss of culture, of identity, and of civilization itself. The people of Britain, once citizens of the mighty Roman Empire, were now left to rebuild their lives in a world without the structure and order that Rome had provided. The Roman gods, once worshipped in grand temples, were now abandoned, their statues broken and scattered across the countryside. The Roman way of life, though not entirely lost, was slowly fading away, replaced by the more primitive ways of the local tribes. The cities that had once been the heart of Roman Britain were now overrun by nature, their streets overtaken by wild grasses and vines. But amid this decay, there was a glimmer of something else. The people of Britain, though they no longer lived under the rule of Rome, had not forgotten the lessons of their former masters. They had learned to build, to govern, and to live in a world that was not always kind. Even as their cities fell into ruin, the spirit of Rome lived on in the hearts of those who had been touched by its greatness. The people of Britain, though no longer part of the empire, carried within them the legacy of Roman civilization. The fall of Roman Britain was not just the fall of a province. It was the fall of an ideal, the loss of a vision that had once shaped the world. The Roman Empire, which had once stood as a symbol of power and order, was now a distant memory. The land that had once been the jewel of the empire was now a fractured and divided world where the echoes of the past could still be heard, but where the glory of Rome had long since faded. In the end, the story of Roman Britain is the story of all empires, for it speaks to the fragile nature of civilization itself. Empires rise, they conquer, they build, and they fall. They leave behind monuments, roads, and cities. But in the end, all that remains is the ruin. It is a story of ambition, of greatness, and of loss. It is the story of a civilization that thought it could conquer time itself, only to be defeated by the very passage of time it had tried to master. The ruins of Roman Britain, like the ruins of all empires, are a reminder of the fleeting nature of greatness. But in their crumbling walls and broken columns, there is also a reminder of what came before, the glory, the power, the vision that once was. And though the empire may have fallen, the echoes of its greatness will continue to resonate through the ages. The echo of footsteps fades across the wind-swept plains of what was once the heart of Roman Britain. What was once a thriving civilization, a beacon of power and order in a world beset by chaos, now lies in ruin. The towering walls of Roman fortresses have crumbled into dust. The great cities, the beating heart of the empire, are now silent and forgotten, their once grand structures overtaken by the relentless forces of time and nature. The baths that once held the weight of an empire's leisure, the grand forums that echoed with the voices of Roman officials, now stand empty, like forgotten tombs, awaiting the final embrace of the earth. It is here, in the desolation of these ruined cities, that we find the true story of Roman Britain, not just of the military campaigns, the sieges, or the fall of cities, but of the very essence of empire itself. Roman Britain was not merely a province, it was a vision, a dream born from the ambition of a civilization that believed it could conquer time, bend the world to its will, and last forever. And yet, as the marble of the empire's monuments began to crack and crumble, so too did the dream. The collapse of Roman Britain was not a sudden event. It did not happen in the span of a single battle, nor was it the result of one catastrophic failure. No, the fall of Roman Britain was the culmination of centuries of slow unraveling, a slow erosion of the very foundations upon which it had been built. It is a story of overextension, of ambition and pride, and of the limits of human power. The Romans, when they first arrived on the shores of Britain, were like gods descending from the heavens. With the might of their legions and the genius of their engineering, they transformed a wild, untamed land into an extension of their empire. The Roman roads stretched across the land like veins, connecting the cities, the forts, the farthest reaches of the empire. The cities of Roman Britain flourished, their markets filled with goods from across the empire, their baths filled with the steam of Roman leisure. But even as the Romans built their empire, they sowed the seeds of their own destruction. It was not the sword that would bring their downfall, nor the rebellious tribes of Britain that would shatter their hold on the land. No, the fall of Roman Britain was born from the very nature of empire itself. The desire for expansion, the thirst for power, and the constant push to stretch one's borders ever further until they broke. The empire's vastness became its weakness. The Roman legions, once masters of the known world, found themselves stretched thin, their strength divided across countless frontiers. The Roman military machine, which had been the cornerstone of the empire's power, began to slow, its engines rusting from overuse. The Roman Empire was no longer an invincible force that could conquer and hold the lands it had claimed. It was a weary, overextended giant, struggling to maintain its grip on a world that was slipping away from it. Britain, once a prized jewel in the crown of the empire, became a burden. The Roman legions stationed there were no longer the powerful, indomitable forces they had once been. They were weary, stretched thin by the endless campaigns across the empire's farthest borders. And as the empire's power waned, so too did the strength of Roman Britain. The roads that had once been symbols of Roman power were now abandoned, their stones cracked and overgrown with weeds. The cities that had once been beacons of Roman civilization were now nothing more than ruins, their once proud buildings falling to the earth in slow decay. As the empire began to falter, so too did the unity that had held it together. The generals, once loyal servants of the emperor, began to see opportunities for personal power. The armies of Roman Britain, now a formidable force in their own right, became pawns in the game of imperial succession. Ambitious men like Claudius Albinus saw the weakening empire as an opportunity, a chance to seize the throne for themselves. In 193 AD, Albinus, stationed in Britain, declared himself emperor. He marched with his legions across the sea, seeking to claim the throne of Rome for himself. For a brief moment, it seemed that Albinus might succeed, but in the end, he was defeated. His forces shattered, and he took his own life in the face of defeat. But the damage had already been done. Albinus's rebellion, though unsuccessful, left Britain vulnerable. The legions that had once defended the province were now scattered, their ranks thinned by the ambitious rise of generals like Albinus. With no one to defend it, Britain became a target for the barbarian tribes, Saxons, Picts, and Scots. These once distant threats, who had been kept at bay by the Roman military, now grew bolder. The great cities of Roman Britain, once teeming with the bustle of Roman life, now lay open to the elements and to the raiders who descended upon them. It was not just the barbarians that threatened Roman Britain, it was the very nature of empire itself. The Roman system, with its reliance on military might and imperial authority, could not last forever. The structures of power, which had once been so carefully constructed by the Romans, began to crack. The local tribes, once subjugated by Roman rule, began to reassert their own control. The people of Britain, once subjects of the Roman Empire, now found themselves caught between the remnants of Roman power and the rising tide of barbarian invasions. In this world of uncertainty, the once great cities of Britain began to fall apart. Londinium, Verulamium, and Camulodunum, once symbols of Roman power, now lay in ruins. The marble floors of the villas cracked, the mosaic tiles faded and chipped. The forums, once bustling with trade and commerce, were now silent. The great baths, which had once been places of leisure and relaxation, were now abandoned, their pools filled with stagnant water. The roads, which had once been the lifeblood of the empire, were now overgrown, lost to time and neglect. Yet, amid the ruins, there was a strange beauty. The crumbling columns and fallen arches, though symbols of decay, still spoke of the grandeur of what had come before. Even in their brokenness, the ruins of Roman Britain whispered of a time when the world had bent to the will of one civilization. And though that civilization was now gone, its legacy lived on, scattered across the land in the form of shattered buildings, broken statues, and weathered roads. But the Roman legacy was not just in the ruins. It was in the people who had lived under Roman rule. Even as the empire faded, the lessons of Rome remained. The people of Britain had learned the ways of Roman engineering, governance, and culture. The legacy of Roman Britain was not just in its buildings, but in the very hearts of the people who had been part of its vision. The people who had once been ruled by Rome now carried its legacy in their bones, in their minds, and in their hearts. And yet, even as the people of Britain carried the memory of Rome within them, they found themselves left to rebuild in a world without the order and structure that Rome had provided. The great cities of Roman Britain fell to ruin, their once proud monuments now crumbling under the weight of time. The legacy of Rome, though still alive in the hearts of its people, was slowly slipping away. As Britain entered a new age, one in which the old Roman ways would give way to new forms of life and power. The fall of Roman Britain is a story not just of the collapse of a province, but of the collapse of an ideal. It is a story of the rise and fall of empires and of the eternal struggle to balance ambition, power, and time. Rome, for all its might, was not immune to the forces that shape every civilization. The marble of its monuments, once so proud and unyielding, now lies shattered, a testament to the fleeting nature of all things. And in the ruins of Roman Britain, we are reminded that all empires, no matter how grand, must one day fall. The collapse of Roman Britain is a story that speaks not only of the decay of a physical empire, but also of the spiritual erosion that occurs when the very foundations of a civilization begin to crumble. In every fallen column, in every shattered arch, there is a story of ambition and ruin, of the rise and fall of men who believed they could shape the world but were ultimately undone by the forces of time, nature, and human nature itself. As the empire withdrew from Britain, the people who had once lived beneath the protective banner of Rome were left in a world without structure. The military presence, which had once kept the northern barbarians at bay, had vanished, and with it, the semblance of order. The cities that had once been centers of Roman culture, their bustling markets filled with goods from every corner of the empire, now lay silent. The grand villas, adorned with mosaics and marble, stood abandoned, their intricate designs faded with the passage of time. The public baths, where Roman citizens had once gathered in leisure, were now empty, their warm waters cold and stagnant. And yet, even in the face of such decay, there was a strange beauty. The ruins, though fractured and broken, still held within them the echoes of something greater. They stood as silent witnesses to a time when the world had bent to the shape of one city's imagination. They were the ghosts of a civilization that had once reached for the heavens and touched the stars, only to be pulled back down to earth by the weight of its own ambitions. The cities, though abandoned, still whispered of their former glory. Londinium, the once thriving heart of Roman Britain, had become a shell of its former self. Its streets, once filled with the sounds of commerce and chatter, now lay empty. The Grand Forum, once a symbol of Roman power, had been reduced to rubble. But even as the buildings decayed, the memory of what had been remained. In the silence of the streets, one could almost hear the echoes of the past, the bustling merchants, the Roman soldiers marching to war, the families gathering in the baths. These sounds, though no longer present, were never truly gone. They lived on in the very air of the city, in the stones beneath one's feet. The fall of Roman Britain was not just the collapse of a city or a province. It was the collapse of an ideal. The Romans had come to Britain with the belief that they could conquer time itself, that they could build an empire that would last forever. They had crafted roads that stretched across the land like veins in the body of the empire, cities that gleamed with marble and stone, and bathhouses that embodied the height of Roman luxury. But all of this, all the grandeur and magnificence, was swept away by the inexorable tide of history. In their pursuit of power, the Romans had ignored the fragility of their own empire. They had built cities that were meant to last for eternity, but eternity, as they would come to learn, was not theirs to command. Their empire, vast and all-encompassing, was built on a fragile foundation, a foundation that was cracked by the overextension of their power, the greed of their leaders, and the inevitability of time itself. And so, in the end, the empire fell, not with a mighty roar, but with a slow, steady decline, as the very forces that had once made it great were turned against it. As the Romans withdrew from Britain, they left behind a land that had been shaped by their hands, but was now free of their control. The people of Britain, once subjects of Roman rule, now found themselves in a world without the guiding hand of empire. They had been given the tools of Roman civilization, the roads, the cities, the knowledge, but now, with no one to guide them, they were left to use those tools as they saw fit. Some turned to the old ways, returning to the tribal structures that had existed before Roman rule. Others, more ambitious, sought to create new forms of power, forging kingdoms and tribes in the wake of the empire's collapse. The fall of Roman Britain was not just a loss for the Romans, but a loss for the people who had lived under Roman rule. They had been part of something greater than themselves, part of a civilization that had once seemed eternal. But now, as the empire fell, they were left to face the harsh realities of a world without the protection and order that Rome had provided. The roads that had once been symbols of Roman power were now used by local tribes for trade, and the grand buildings that had once been the centers of Roman society were now abandoned, their walls crumbling, their floors cracked. In the absence of Roman authority, the people of Britain were left to their own devices. Some sought to rebuild what had been lost, while others turned to more primal forms of power. The Saxons, Picts, and Scots, once kept at bay by the Roman legions, began to move into the land, taking advantage of the power vacuum left by the empire's withdrawal. The cities that had once been the heart of Roman Britain were now vulnerable, and the tribes that had once been subjugated by Roman rule began to reclaim their land. The fall of Roman Britain, like the fall of all empires, was not simply a matter of military defeat or political collapse. It was the collapse of an entire worldview, the collapse of a vision of civilization that had once seemed unshakable. The Roman Empire had been built on the belief that it could shape the world to its will, that its reach could extend across the globe and last forever. But in the end, the empire was brought low by the very forces it had sought to control, the forces of time, nature, and human ambition. And so, as the final legions departed from Britain, the once great civilization of Rome slipped into the past. The ruins that were left behind became the last testament to the grandeur of an empire that had once ruled the known world. In the silence of the crumbling cities, the people of Britain were left to reflect on what had been, on what was lost, and on what would come next. The world had changed, and with it, the people of Britain would have to change as well. But even as the Roman Empire faded from the shores of Britain, its legacy would live on, buried deep within the ruins, in the roads, the cities, and the people who had once been part of its vision. For the fall of Roman Britain is not just a story of decay and decline. It is a story of the fragility of civilization, of the way empires rise and fall, and of the eternal cycle of creation and destruction. The ruins of Roman Britain, though broken and weathered, still stand as a reminder that even the greatest empires must one day fade, leaving only their memories behind. And in those memories, in the stories of their rise and fall, we find the true meaning of their legacy. In the haunting silence that now stretches across the land, the ruins of Roman Britain stand as solemn witnesses to a once glorious empire, now reduced to forgotten fragments. The roads, once the veins through which the lifeblood of Roman control coursed, are now covered in moss and dust. The imposing structures that had once glimmered with the light of imperial ambition are now cracked and hollow, their silent presence a testament to the impermanence of human grandeur. The very soil, once molded by the hands of Romans, now lies heavy with the weight of the past. In the days of its rise, Britain was a far-off and mysterious place, savage, untamed, and the stuff of legend. Yet the Roman Empire, which had mastered the art of empire building, saw in this wild land an opportunity to expand its reach. They came with their iron legions and their visions of order, bringing roads, cities, and a new way of life to a place that had known little of such things. The echoes of the empire's presence still linger in the land, like a fading echo of a forgotten song. It was a story of great ambition, one that aimed to shape the world. The Romans came, not just to conquer, but to imprint their vision upon the very fabric of the world. They made the wild, untamed lands of Britain into something more, a reflection of Roman power, an extension of Roman civilization. The cities of Londinium, Camulodunum, and Verulamium rose like towering monuments, crafted by the brilliance of Roman engineering. The roads that once stretched from the south to the north were symbols of control, symbols of empire. These were the roads upon which Roman legions had marched and Roman merchants had traded. They were more than mere stone and mortar. They were the arteries of an empire that spanned continents. But the greatness of Rome was built upon a fragile foundation, and that foundation began to crack long before the final withdrawal of the legions. For all its grandeur, for all its vision, Rome was not eternal. Time, the most relentless of forces, eroded the marble of eternity. And as the empire expanded, so too did its weaknesses. The legions, once formidable, found themselves stretched thin, scattered across distant frontiers. Britain, once a prized jewel, became an afterthought, a burden to the empire that could no longer sustain the weight of its own ambitions. The roads that once gleamed with the power of Rome were now worn down by the passage of time. The cities that had once thrived under Roman rule began to decay, their walls crumbling, their foundations sinking into the earth. The once proud buildings, adorned with marble and mosaic, now stood in ruin, their beauty fading, swallowed by the relentless forces of nature. The grand baths, which had once been places of leisure and luxury, were now filled with stagnant water, their warm pools cold and forgotten. The empire that had once brought order to the world had left behind only fragments of a dream that could not withstand the test of time. Yet even in the midst of this ruin there was a strange beauty. The ruins of Roman Britain, though crumbling, still held within them the echoes of a time when the world had been shaped by the hand of empire. The very decay of the buildings seemed to carry a dignity, as if they were resigning themselves to the inevitable march of time. The broken columns and fallen arches, though shattered, still stood proud, like ancient warriors who had fallen but could not be forgotten. The ruins, though faded, were still reminders of something greater. A time when the world had been bent to the shape of one city's imagination. And yet, as the empire withdrew from Britain, its absence was felt not only in the physical realm, but in the very fabric of society. Roman Britain had been a world defined by order, by laws, by roads that connected people, goods, and ideas. It was a world where the presence of Roman rule had brought a sense of stability and purpose. But with the withdrawal of the legions came the collapse of that order. The great cities, once symbols of Roman civilization, began to fragment, left to the mercy of nature and the rising tides of barbarian invasions. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was no more. The people of Britain, once subjects of Roman power, now found themselves caught between two worlds. They had been given the gifts of Roman civilization, the roads, the buildings, the baths, the very structure of Roman life. But with the fall of the empire, those gifts began to wither and fade. The people of Britain, no longer bound by the authority of Rome, had to adapt to a world that had slipped out of their control. The roads, once symbols of Roman strength, were now paths for wandering tribes. The cities, once places of commerce and culture, were now silent ruins. The legacy of Rome, though still present in the land, was fading. The glory that had once defined Roman Britain was slipping into the past, leaving only the ruins behind. The fall of Roman Britain is not merely a tale of military defeat, nor is it a story of political collapse. It is the story of the inevitable passage of time, the story of how empires rise and fall. Rome, for all its grandeur, was not immune to the forces that shape every civilization. The empire had been built upon the blood of its soldiers, the labor of its people, and the ambition of its rulers. From that blood came order. From that order came the empire that ruled the known world. But from that order also came the seeds of its own destruction. The very ambition that had fueled Rome's rise to power was the same ambition that led to its decline. The desire to conquer, to expand, to impose order on the world was ultimately what brought about its downfall. The story of Roman Britain is the story of the fragile nature of power. It is a story of the limitations of human ambition, of how even the greatest empires cannot withstand the passage of time forever. The fall of Roman Britain is a reminder that all things must come to an end, no matter how great they may seem. The empire that once stretched across continents, that had once brought peace and prosperity to the known world, now lies in ruin. The marble columns, the grand forums, the gleaming roads, they are all that remain. And even these, though they once stood as symbols of eternal power, are fading, crumbling, like all things before them. As we look upon the ruins of Roman Britain, we are reminded of the transience of all things. The rise and fall of empires is a cycle that repeats itself, time and time again. The grandeur of Rome, like the marble that once adorned its buildings, is crumbling away, but in its decay, there is a beauty, a lesson, a reminder that greatness, though fleeting, is no less magnificent. The ruins of Roman Britain are not just remnants of a lost civilization. They are a testament to the ambition of humanity, to the heights we can reach, and to the depths we can fall. The decline of Roman Britain is not simply a tale of lost cities and crumbling walls. It is a meditation on the inevitable end of all things, the slow unraveling of what was once believed to be eternal. It is a story that, though rooted in the past, speaks to us across the centuries. For in the fall of Roman Britain, we see the inevitable consequence of empire, the erosion of power, the fading of glory, and the helplessness of the human spirit in the face of time's inexorable march. As the empire withdrew, the people of Britain found themselves lost in a world that had once been defined by order, but now teetered on the edge of chaos. Without the guiding hand of Roman authority, the foundations of society began to crack. The roads that had once served as the arteries of the empire were now little more than paths, overgrown and forgotten. The great cities, like Londinium, once vibrant centers of trade and culture, now lay in ruin. The marble and stone that had been so carefully shaped by the hands of Roman architects now crumbled beneath the weight of the centuries. In the silence of these ruins, one could almost hear the whispers of a time long past, of men and women who had once walked these streets, lived within these walls, and believed that they were part of something greater. Yet, in the face of this decay, there was a strange beauty. The ruins, though crumbling, still spoke of greatness. The shattered columns, the broken arches, and the remnants of once grand buildings stood as a testament to the ambition of the Romans, to their vision of a world united under one banner. And in the rubble, we can almost hear the echo of Roman voices, the soldiers, the traders, the citizens who once lived in a world defined by Rome's reach. Their world may have collapsed, but their legacy endured in the very stones that lay scattered across the land. But the fall of Roman Britain was not simply a result of external forces. It was the culmination of internal strife, of the breakdown of the very system that had once held the empire together. The Roman Empire, for all its strength, had been built on a fragile foundation. An empire that had expanded too far, its borders stretched thin by the relentless push of conquest and ambition. The very systems of power that had brought Rome to its greatest heights became the instruments of its downfall. The legionaries, who had once been the backbone of the empire's might, now found themselves fighting not only external threats, but internal battles for power. The empire, once united under the authority of Rome, fractured into competing factions, each one vying for control. The generals who once served under the emperor now sought the throne for themselves, and in their ambition, they abandoned their duties, leaving their provinces vulnerable. The withdrawal of the Roman legions from Britain marked a turning point in the history of the island. Once protected by the might of Rome, the British Isles now found themselves vulnerable to the very forces that had been kept at bay for centuries. The Picts, the Saxons, and the Scots, all once distant and isolated peoples, now descended upon the land, seizing upon the absence of Roman authority. The Roman cities, once thriving hubs of commerce and culture, became hollow shells, vulnerable to the ravages of barbarian invasions. As the Romans withdrew, Britain's landscape was altered forever. The cities that had been symbols of Roman power and order were abandoned. The grand public baths, which had once stood as places of leisure and community, were now empty, their heated pools cold and stagnant. The roads that had connected the far reaches of the empire were now overgrown, their paths swallowed by the land. The walls, which had once been built to defend the empire, now lay in ruin, their stones scattered and forgotten. Yet, Even as the physical remnants of Roman Britain faded into the earth, their legacy endured. The people who had once been subjects of the Roman Empire carried with them the knowledge, the skills, and the traditions that had been imparted to them by their Roman masters. Even as the empire crumbled, the legacy of Roman civilization continued to shape the people of Britain. The roads, though now crumbling, still served as paths for trade and travel. The ruins of Roman villas and towns, though abandoned, still held within them the echoes of Roman life, of a time when the world had been ruled by the might of Rome. The fall of Roman Britain, however, was not merely a loss of physical infrastructure. It was the loss of a way of life, a culture that had been shaped by the Romans and their vision of the world. The Romans had brought with them not just roads and buildings, but a way of thinking, a way of living. They had introduced the concepts of law, of governance, of engineering, and of architecture. They had shaped the very fabric of British society, and even in their absence, their influence could still be felt. But as the years passed and the memory of Rome faded, Britain began to forge its own path. The people, though still carrying the legacy of Roman civilization, now found themselves free from the constraints of Roman rule. The tribal societies that had once been suppressed by Roman authority began to resurface, and new kingdoms began to form in the wake of the empire's collapse. The great cities of Roman Britain, once united under the banner of Rome, now splintered into smaller, more localized communities. The roads, once the arteries of the empire, became the lifeblood of these new kingdoms. The Roman baths, once places of leisure and culture, were abandoned in favor of simpler, more rustic forms of living. The villas and temples that had once adorned the countryside were reclaimed by nature, their marble and stone now overgrown with ivy and moss. The grand monuments of Roman Britain, though still standing in some places, became symbols of a bygone era, a reminder of what had once been but no longer could be. And yet, despite the collapse of Roman Britain, the influence of Rome never truly disappeared. The ruins, though abandoned, continued to speak to those who came after, their crumbling walls holding within them the memory of a time when the world had been shaped by the hands of the Romans. The legacy of Rome lived on in the very bones of the land, etched into the roads, the cities, and the people who had once lived under its rule. The story of Roman Britain is, in many ways, the story of all empires. It is a story of rise and fall, of greatness and decline. It is a story of ambition, of power, and of the human desire to shape the world according to one's will. But it is also a story of the inevitable passage of time, of how all things must eventually come to an end. The ruins of Roman Britain stand not only as a reminder of what was lost, but as a testament to the ambition and vision of the people who built it. For even in their decay, the ruins hold within them the echoes of a civilization that sought to conquer time itself. And so, as the sun sets over the ruins of Roman Britain, we are left with the haunting reminder that all empires, no matter how mighty, are bound by the same fate. They rise, they shine, and then they fade. But in their fading, they leave behind something that endures, a legacy that speaks to the human spirit, to the ambition that drives us to build, and to the inevitable forces that shape the world. Amid the fading twilight of Roman rule in Britain, a profound silence settled upon the land. Where once there had been the sounds of soldiers marching, of citizens trading, of the proud cries of an empire at its peak, now there was only the wind sweeping through crumbling walls and over broken roads. The cities, once teeming with life, were now ghost towns, their grandeur a distant memory, their opulence turned to dust. To understand the collapse of Roman Britain is to contemplate the essence of empire itself, the journey from the birth of greatness to its inevitable decay. The Romans had come to Britain as conquerors, bearing the might of an empire that stretched from the sands of Africa to the icy wastes of the north. They built with the precision of gods, roads, walls, cities, imposing order upon a land that had known little of it. For nearly 4 centuries, Britain stood as a jewel in the Roman crown, a province that prospered under the watchful eyes of its imperial masters. But what is empire but a delicate balance between power and fragility? For all its strength, for all its grandeur, the Roman Empire was, in the end, no different from the men who built it, mortal, bound by time, and vulnerable to the very forces that had propelled it to greatness. The Romans had shaped the world according to their will, but in the process, they had overextended themselves, pushing the boundaries of their empire too far, too wide. They had marched across the earth with the confidence of immortality, believing that their reach would never end. But even the greatest of civilizations must eventually reckon with the passage of time. By the early 5th century, the great empire was beginning to fray at the edges. Political turmoil, economic strain, and the constant pressure from barbarian invaders had left the Roman state weakened. The once mighty legions, which had once been the empire's greatest strength, were now scattered, divided, and diminished. Britain, once the heart of Roman ambition, was now a distant frontier, neglected and vulnerable. The withdrawal of the last Roman legions from Britain in 410 AD marked the final act in the tragic drama of imperial decline. With no soldiers to defend them, no emperor to guide them, the people of Britain were left to navigate a world in which the power that had once shaped their lives was no longer present. The Romans, for all their accomplishments, had built their empire on a foundation of power and domination. They had imposed their will upon the world with the might of their legions, their laws, their infrastructure. But in the end, they had failed to secure the permanence they so desired. What remains now, in the wake of their departure, is not just the decay of their buildings, but the loss of the world they sought to create. The world that had been molded by Roman hands was slipping away piece by piece to be replaced by a new reality. A world in which the shadows of empire loomed large but could no longer be touched. For the people of Britain, the collapse of Roman rule was more than just a political upheaval. It was the unraveling of a world they had known, a world that had shaped their lives, their identities, their very way of being. The roads, the villas, the baths, they were all symbols of the Roman vision, of a civilization that had once seemed eternal. But as the empire faltered and fell, those symbols began to fade, leaving behind nothing but ruins. The citizens of Roman Britain, once proud subjects of an empire that spanned the known world, now found themselves in a land stripped of the grandeur that had once defined their lives. The land, once transformed by Roman hands, now began to return to its natural state. The roads, which had been the arteries of Roman Britain, were now little more than overgrown tracks. The walls, which had stood as symbols of Roman power and protection, were now broken and crumbling, their stones scattered across the landscape. The once proud cities, which had been filled with the hustle and bustle of Roman life, were now deserted. Londinium, once the beating heart of Roman Britain, had become a shadow of its former self. Its streets, once teeming with traders and soldiers, were now empty. The great public baths, once the epitome of Roman luxury, were now abandoned, their pools stagnant and cold. The villas that had once housed the elite of Roman society were now nothing more than shells, their marble floors cracked and their mosaics faded. Yet, in the decay, there was a quiet beauty. For all the crumbling ruins, the land still whispered of the greatness that had once been. The broken columns and shattered arches were not merely symbols of destruction, but of the ambition that had once driven Rome to build. In the silence of the ruins, there was a sense of reverence for what had been and for what had been lost. The world that the Romans had dreamed of, a world of order, of civilization, of power, was no longer present. But its echo remained, lingering in the stones, in the earth, in the very air that still carried the scent of Rome. The fall of Roman Britain was not just a political collapse, it was the collapse of a vision. The Romans had come to Britain with a dream of an empire that would last forever, a dream of order and prosperity that would endure across the ages. They had built cities, roads, and baths, and in doing so, they had created a world that seemed impervious to time. But the fall of Roman Britain was the bitter reminder that no empire, no matter how mighty, can escape the forces of time and nature. The Romans had sought to conquer the world, and in doing so, they had conquered themselves. They had built a civilization that could not endure, a vision that could not be realized. And as their empire collapsed, the people of Britain were left to rebuild, to find their own way in a world without the guiding hand of Rome. In the ruins, the people of Britain could only look back at what had been and mourn the loss of a world that was now gone. The roads, the cities, the baths, they were all that remained of the empire that had once shaped their lives. But the legacy of Rome was not just in its buildings, it was in the very bones of the land. The people of Britain, though no longer subjects of Roman rule, still carried with them the legacy of Rome in their hearts, in their culture, in their way of life. For in the end, the fall of Roman Britain is not just the story of an empire's decline, it is the story of the human condition itself, the story of how civilizations rise, thrive, and eventually fade away. It is a story of ambition, of power, of glory, and of loss. And in the ruins of Roman Britain, we are reminded that all things, no matter how great, must come to an end. As the centuries passed and the grandeur of Roman Britain faded into memory, a new reality began to take root. The grand roads that once connected Londinium to the farthest reaches of the empire were now overgrown with wild grass, their stones buried beneath the earth's relentless embrace. The majestic structures, monuments to an empire that had once believed itself eternal, now stood only as fractured remnants, their beauty hidden beneath the dust of time. Yet, even in their crumbling state, the ruins of Roman Britain held within them a strange, sorrowful beauty, one that spoke not of the power and majesty of Rome, but of the inevitable fragility of all empires, all civilizations, and all human endeavors. The final years of Roman Britain were marked by a profound transformation. The empire that had once extended its dominion over vast lands was now a distant memory, its soldiers and governors replaced by local leaders, tribal chieftains, and ambitious men seeking power in a land abandoned by Rome. As the legions departed, so too did the system of Roman governance that had once brought order to the island. The power vacuum left behind allowed the once subjugated tribes, the Picts, the Saxons, the Scots, to assert their dominance, reclaiming lands that had been theirs long before the Romans set foot on British soil. The departure of the Romans did not simply signify the end of an empire. It signified the unraveling of an entire worldview. The Romans had not just conquered lands, they had reshaped entire cultures, brought forth a new order, and imprinted their ideas of civilization upon the world. And yet, that very civilization, so seemingly indomitable, so sure of its place in history, was swept away by the relentless march of time and the forces of nature, which have no respect for the ambitions of men. For those who remained in Britain after the Romans left, the world had changed irrevocably. The once glorious cities of Roman Britain, now in decay, stood as stark reminders of a past that could never be recaptured. Londinium, which had once been the heart of Roman Britain, was now a shadow of its former self. Its streets, once vibrant with trade and commerce, were now empty, its grand forum reduced to rubble. The baths that had once served as places of relaxation and socialization were now silent, their pools empty, their tiles cracked. The villas, once the homes of Roman aristocrats, had become abandoned shells, their mosaics shattered, their once beautiful gardens overrun with weeds. In this new world, the people of Britain were forced to adapt. They could no longer rely on the power and structure that had been imposed by Roman rule. The roads that had once been used by Roman legions to march to war now served as paths for wandering tribes. The buildings that had once been symbols of Roman power were now relics, stripped of their grandeur, their purpose lost to time. The very fabric of British society, once shaped by Roman order and organization, was now unraveling, leaving behind a world that was no longer recognizable. Yet even as the Roman presence faded from Britain, the influence of the empire could still be felt. The people who had once lived under Roman rule carried with them the lessons of civilization, of law, of governance, of architecture, of trade. The legacy of Rome was not merely in the stone and marble it left behind, but in the minds and hearts of those who had once been part of the empire. Though the cities were falling into ruin, the culture of Rome, with all its accomplishments and flaws, continued to live on in the people of Britain. The Roman roads, though crumbling, still connected the scattered communities across the land, reminding the people of a time when order had prevailed. However, the collapse of Roman Britain was not just a result of military withdrawal or political instability. It was also the result of the deep contradictions at the heart of the Roman Empire itself. For all its achievements, Rome was a civilization built on conquest and domination. Its power, which had been the very foundation of its greatness, was also the source of its fragility. The Romans had built their empire on the blood of conquered peoples, on the backs of slaves, and on the labor of those they subjugated. They had created a system in which power was concentrated in the hands of a few, and in the end, this system proved to be unsustainable. As the empire began to crumble, it was not just the soldiers who left, but the very sense of unity that had once held the empire together. The Roman legions, which had been the glue that held the provinces together, were now scattered and divided. The generals, once loyal servants of the emperor, now turned their eyes toward power, seizing control of their own territories. The very structure of the Roman state, with its centralization of power, had begun to fracture. And as the cracks in the empire deepened, the world that had been built by the Romans began to unravel. The people of Britain, no longer subjects of Roman rule, were left to navigate a world without the order and stability that Rome had once provided. The local tribes, once subjugated by the power of Rome, now reasserted their influence, carving out kingdoms in the wake of the empire's collapse. The great cities, once symbols of Roman achievement, were abandoned, and the roads, once the lifeblood of the empire, were left to decay. The Roman villas, which had once housed the elite of Roman society, were now overrun with nature, their grandeur lost to time. In the absence of Roman authority, the people of Britain were left to rebuild their world in their own image. The cities of Roman Britain, though once symbols of civilization, now stood in ruins, their beauty fading with each passing year. The once glorious empire, which had sought to conquer the world and shape it in its image, was now a distant memory, and the world it had created was slipping away piece by piece. The people of Britain, now free from the rule of Rome, were left to forge a new future, a future that would be shaped by the forces of history, not by the will of an empire that had long since fallen. Yet even as Roman Britain faded into history, its legacy lived on in the very fabric of the land. The roads, the cities, the villas, All of these remnants of the Roman Empire continued to shape the people of Britain, their influence felt in the very structure of society. The fall of Roman Britain was not just the end of an empire, it was the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the British Isles. And in that new world, the echoes of Rome would continue to reverberate, carried on the winds of time, like the last whispers of a dream that could never be fully realized. In the shadow of the past, amid the ruins of Roman Britain, there lies a profound silence, a silence that speaks louder than the clamor of battle and the rush of Roman legions marching across the land. It is a silence that tells the story of an empire whose ambitions once spanned continents, whose grandeur once seemed untouchable, but which has now faded into the quiet whispers of history. The roads that once connected the vast reaches of the empire, the towering fortresses that once held the line against barbarian incursions, the magnificent baths and villas, all now lie in ruin, crumbling beneath the relentless passage of time. To understand the fall of Roman Britain is to understand the essence of empire itself, the great triumphs and the inevitable decay that follows. The Romans came to Britain as conquerors, bringing with them not just their armies, but their vision of a new world. They transformed the land, shaping it with their laws, their architecture, and their engineering. They built roads, walls, and cities that would forever alter the landscape of Britain. They gave the land structure, order, and purpose, and for a time, it seemed that Rome's reach would never end. But empires, no matter how vast, are built on fragile foundations. The very ambition that drives them to greatness is often the same force that leads to their downfall. The Roman Empire, for all its might and glory, was no different. What had begun as an empire built upon conquest and the subjugation of others gradually became an empire spread too thin, with too many fronts to defend, too many resources to sustain. The vastness of Roman power, once its greatest strength, became its greatest weakness. Rome's ambitious reach, so sure of its immortality, could not withstand the slow erosion of time and the growing pressure from within and without. By the time the Roman legions were called back to defend the heart of the empire, Britain, once one of Rome's most prized provinces, was left to its own devices. The roads that once connected the province to the empire's farthest reaches were now abandoned, their stones covered with moss and dirt. The fortresses, once brimming with the strength of Roman soldiers, were now empty, the banners of Rome replaced by the winds that howled through the crumbling walls. The cities that had once been the pride of the empire, Londinium, Camulodunum, Verulamium, were now mere shadows of their former selves, their grandeur lost to the ravages of time and the barbarian raids that followed. But the story of Roman Britain is not merely one of military defeat or political collapse. It is the story of a civilization that believed it could shape the world, that it could create a legacy that would endure forever, only to see that vision slowly unravel in the face of forces beyond its control. The fall of Roman Britain is the inevitable consequence of empire's reach, a reminder that all things, no matter how mighty, must eventually fade. For nearly 4 centuries, the Roman Empire had imposed its will upon Britain, transforming it into a land of cities, roads, and walls, all designed to reflect the glory of Rome. But as the empire faltered, so too did the world that had been built upon it. The withdrawal of the legions marked the beginning of a new age, a world where the once great cities of Roman Britain were left to decay, their streets empty, their grand structures abandoned. The Romans had left behind a land that was now vulnerable to the very forces they had once kept at bay. The Picts, the Saxons, the Scots, tribes that had once been subjugated, now found themselves with the freedom to reclaim what had once been theirs. The land that had been shaped by Roman hands was now returning to the wild. In the absence of Roman authority, Britain began to fracture. The roads, once used to transport soldiers and goods across the empire, were now paths for local communities to travel, isolated from the larger world. The cities, which had once been thriving centers of commerce and culture, were now little more than abandoned ruins. Londinium, once a bustling hub, was now a silent shadow, its once grand forum now a pile of rubble. The public baths, which had once been places of relaxation and social interaction, were now forgotten, their waters stagnant. The villas, once adorned with mosaics and marble, were now empty, their beauty fading as nature reclaimed them. And yet, within the decay of these once great cities, there was a strange beauty, a reminder of what had once been. The broken columns, the shattered arches, the crumbling walls, all stood as silent witnesses to the ambition and vision that had once brought Rome to Britain. The Romans had believed that they could shape the world, that they could build an empire that would last for eternity. But in the end, their empire, like all empires, fell to the passage of time. The beauty of these ruins lies not in their grandeur, but in their quiet reminder of human ambition. The Romans built with the knowledge that their civilization would one day pass into history, but they believed that their legacy would endure. In the ruins of Roman Britain, we are reminded that all empires, no matter how great, must eventually fall. The Romans sought to conquer time itself, to leave behind a legacy that would stretch beyond the boundaries of history. But time, as it always does, claimed what it had been given, and the empire that had once ruled the known world was reduced to fragments. Yet even as the empire crumbled, the legacy of Rome lived on in the land it had once shaped. The roads, though cracked and overgrown, still connected communities, a testament to Roman engineering. The people of Britain, though no longer subjects of Roman rule, still carried the lessons of Roman civilization, their laws, their architecture, their culture. The Romans had left behind more than just stone and marble. They had left behind a legacy that continued to shape the land and its people. The fall of Roman Britain was not simply the collapse of an empire, it was the collapse of a dream, a vision that had once seemed unshakable. But in that collapse, there was also something beautiful, a reminder that even in their fall, empires leave behind something that endures. The ruins of Roman Britain may be broken and faded, but they still speak to us of the ambition, the vision, and the human spirit that once shaped them. As the years turned to centuries, the fading grandeur of Roman Britain left behind a landscape that had once been vibrant with life, now nothing more than a tapestry of ruins, each stone a mute witness to a time when the world bent beneath the rule of Rome. These ruins, though now scattered and abandoned, still carry within them the ghosts of a time when the empire, in its ambition, sought to reshape not just lands, but the very essence of civilization. What remains of Roman Britain is not merely a collection of broken columns or shattered streets. It is a symbol of the fragile nature of human endeavor, of the impermanence of power, and of the eventual retreat of all empires before the relentless march of time. In the wake of Roman rule, Britain was cast adrift, no longer bound by the laws and structure of Rome. The island found itself slipping back into a more primitive state, where local tribes and competing warlords began to carve out their own territories. The Roman order, which had been carefully constructed over centuries, was now nothing more than a memory, leaving behind only fragments of its former self, ruined cities, abandoned roads, and the scattered remnants of an empire that had once claimed the world as its own. The withdrawal of the legions was more than just the departure of soldiers. It was the abandonment of an entire way of life. The Romans had brought with them not just their military might, but a vision of civilization that had reshaped the very fabric of the land. The roads they built, stretching across the island, were once symbols of Roman might and connectivity, but now they were fading, overgrown with weeds. Their once precise engineering lost to the ravages of time. The cities, once bustling centers of commerce and culture, had become hollow shells, their public baths, temples, and forums now empty and silent. And yet, in the midst of this decay, there is a strange beauty. A beauty born not from the splendor that once was, but from the quiet reflection of what came before. The ruins of Roman Britain are more than just broken buildings and fallen columns. They are the remnants of human ambition, of a dream to create something lasting, something eternal. Even in their decay, these ruins speak to the grandeur of a civilization that sought to shape the world in its image. A world that, despite its flaws, was built upon a vision of order, of law, and of progress. In these crumbling remnants, we find the soul of Rome, the ambition, the greatness, the fragility, and the ultimate collapse. But beyond the physical decay, the fall of Roman Britain is also a reminder of the cyclical nature of history. Empires rise, they conquer, they build, and eventually they fall. Rome was no exception. The Roman Empire, in its pursuit of glory and domination, had pushed itself to the limits of its strength. The need to expand, to conquer, to control, had stretched its resources thin. The once mighty legions, which had carried Rome's will to the farthest reaches of the known world, were now stretched too far, their strength divided across too many fronts. The once immovable power of Rome had begun to falter under the weight of its own ambitions. The fall of Roman Britain, then, wasn't a singular event, but the culmination of centuries of strain. The empire had been growing weaker long before the final withdrawal of the legions. The power of Rome had been eroded from within, not just by external threats, but by internal conflict, corruption, and the erosion of the very ideals upon which it had been built. The dream of an eternal empire was, in the end, a vision that could not withstand the passage of time. What was left behind in the wake of Rome's departure from Britain was not just a land of empty cities and overgrown roads, but a people lost in a world without the structure and order that Rome had provided. The people of Britain, once subjects of Roman rule, now found themselves caught between two worlds, the world of their ancient traditions and the world of Roman civilization. The legacy of Rome was still present, woven into the very fabric of British society. But it was now fading, replaced by new ways of life, new forms of power, and new rulers. The ruins that remain, scattered across the landscape, are the only reminders of what once was. They are not just monuments to a lost civilization, but symbols of the fragility of all human endeavors. Rome, for all its grandeur, was not eternal. Its power, its order, its civilization, none of it could withstand the ravages of time. The fall of Roman Britain is the story of the collapse of a dream, the collapse of a vision of what the world could be. And yet, in that collapse, there is something profoundly beautiful, a reminder that even in decay, there is meaning, there is significance, and there's a lesson for all who come after. For in the ruins of Roman Britain, we are reminded of the transience of all things. The rise and fall of empires is not a new story. It is a cycle that has been repeated throughout history and will continue to be repeated. What the Romans built, they built with the belief that their empire would last forever, that their power would never fade. But as we look upon the ruins they left behind, we see that the grandeur of empire is fleeting. What remains, in the end, is not the power or the glory, but the legacy, the ideas, the culture, the values that remain long after the empire has fallen. In the ruins of Roman Britain, we find not just the remnants of a lost civilization, but a powerful lesson. The lesson that all things, no matter how great, must eventually give way to the forces of time. The lesson that even the most powerful empires are ultimately bound by the same fate as all things: impermanence. The lesson that the true legacy of any civilization lies not in its buildings, its monuments, or its roads, but in the ideas and values it leaves behind, the imprint it makes upon the hearts and minds of those who inherit it. The fall of Roman Britain, like all the great collapses of history, is both a tragedy and a triumph. It is a tragedy because it marks the loss of something great, an empire that once shaped the world in its image. But it is a triumph because in its fall it leaves behind a legacy that continues to shape the world today. The ruins of Roman Britain are not just the broken remnants of an ancient empire. They are the lasting testament to the ambition and vision of a civilization that sought to conquer the world and whose influence still echoes across the centuries. The earth beneath the crumbling walls of Roman Britain seems to breathe with the passage of time. Each stone, each fragment of broken column, a silent witness to the rise and fall of a civilization that sought to conquer eternity. In these ruins, the very soul of Rome, once a city that bent the world to its will, now lies scattered and forgotten. The legacies of its grandeur, its monuments, its far-reaching roads have all succumbed to the relentless forces of time and nature. But as we walk through these remains, as we trace the outline of broken walls and sunken streets, we are reminded not only of what was lost, but of the grand vision that once sought to shape the world. Roman Britain was not merely a province. It was an experiment, a microcosm of the Roman dream itself. Here, in this far corner of the empire, Rome sought to bring its vision of civilization to the wild and untamed lands of the Britons. The roads that the Romans laid down, smooth and straight, stretching from the southern coast to the far northern reaches, were not just means of transport. They were symbols of Roman order, an unyielding reminder of Roman will. The cities, such as Londinium and Camulodunum, were more than just settlements. They were manifestations of Roman power and ingenuity, places where the ideals of the empire were brought to life in brick and mortar, in the grand forums, the majestic temples, and the luxurious baths. And yet, for all their brilliance, the Romans, like all men, were bound by the limits of their own vision. They had built an empire that was vast, reaching across 3 continents, and in doing so, had stretched their resources and their power beyond the breaking point. The legions that had once been the iron fist of Roman might, marching with discipline and precision, were now scattered thin across a vast empire. The dreams of Roman glory, so passionately pursued by generals and emperors alike, had led to the inevitable exhaustion of the empire's strength. When the Roman legions were withdrawn from Britain in 410 AD, it was not simply the end of military presence. It was the end of an era. The Romans had come to Britain not just to conquer, but to leave an indelible mark upon the land, to shape its people, its culture, its very essence. And for nearly 4 centuries they succeeded. But, with their departure, Britain was left to fend for itself, adrift in a world that had been irrevocably altered by Roman hands. No longer would the people of Britain look to Rome for guidance or protection. No longer would they walk the roads that led to the heart of the empire. The withdrawal of the Romans left behind not just the physical remnants of their rule, but the absence of a way of life, a world that had been defined by Roman order. The roads were no longer the arteries of the empire, but paths for local tribes to travel, separated by the crumbling remnants of Roman civilization. The cities, once hubs of Roman life, were now ghost towns. Londinium, which had once stood as the jewel of Roman Britain, was reduced to rubble, its grand buildings left to the mercy of time and the elements. The baths, the temples, the grand villas, all had fallen into disrepair, their once proud architecture now lost beneath layers of earth and ivy. Yet, in the silence of these ruins, there is a strange beauty. It is the beauty of things that have passed into history, the beauty of time's relentless erosion, which, while breaking down the old, allows space for something new to emerge. The ruins of Roman Britain are not simply symbols of decay, but symbols of what humanity can achieve when it dares to dream. The roads, though now cracked and overgrown, still trace the paths of Roman ambition, reminding us of a time when the world seemed within reach of human will. The columns, though shattered, still stand as testaments to the ingenuity of Roman engineering, to the skill and vision of those who built them. But even as we marvel at the beauty in the ruins, we cannot ignore the sadness that lingers. There is a melancholy that comes with the realization that the empire that built these great works is gone, never to return. The people of Britain, once subjects of the greatest empire the world had ever known, were now left to pick up the pieces of a world that had unraveled. The absence of Roman authority was felt not just in the empty cities, but in the very fabric of society. The laws, the customs, the way of life that had been instilled by Roman rule, these too began to fade, replaced by a new order, one that was less structured, less unified. The tribes that had once been subdued by Roman power now began to reassert their influence. The Saxons, Picts, and Scots, who had been held at bay by the strength of Roman legions, now filled the power vacuum left by Rome's departure. The great cities of Roman Britain, which had once been symbols of Roman civilization, were now vulnerable to these raiding tribes. The roads that had once connected the farthest reaches of the empire were now isolated, little more than pathways for small local communities. The once grand villas and forums, the magnificent baths, the public baths and temples, once symbols of a thriving empire, now lay in ruin. And yet, the legacy of Rome was not entirely lost. It is in these ruins that the seeds of the future can be found. The people of Britain, though no longer subjects of Roman rule, still carried with them the knowledge and skills that Rome had imparted. The roads, though abandoned, still traced the outlines of a civilization that had once spread across the known world. The techniques of Roman engineering and construction, though fading, would influence the structures built in the centuries that followed. Even the language, the law, and the organization of society that had been shaped by Roman rule left an imprint on the future of Britain. The fall of Roman Britain is a reminder of the cyclical nature of history. Empires rise, they conquer, they build, and eventually they fall. The Romans, for all their power, could not escape the forces that bring all things to an end. The fall of Roman Britain was the end of a great experiment, but it was also the beginning of something new. The people of Britain, though left to navigate the world without the guiding hand of Rome, would carry with them the lessons of the empire that had shaped their world. In the end, the ruins of Roman Britain are not just remnants of a lost civilization. They are the markers of human ambition, of a desire to build something lasting, something eternal. They are a reminder that even in decay, there is beauty. Even in destruction, there is the possibility of rebirth. The fall of Roman Britain may have marked the end of an empire, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in the story of Britain, a chapter that would be shaped by the very lessons of Rome, even as the empire itself faded into the past. The decline of Roman Britain is more than just the fading of cities or the loss of political authority. It is the collapse of an idea, an ideal of civilization that once sought to dominate and control the world, leaving an indelible imprint on everything it touched. It is a somber reminder that all things, no matter how mighty, will eventually succumb to the ravages of time. The ruins of Roman Britain stand as silent witnesses to a once mighty empire that believed in its immortality, only to find itself undone by the very forces it sought to control. As the legions marched away, the heart of Roman Britain was left exposed, vulnerable to the winds of change. With no imperial authority to hold the land together, the various tribal groups that had once been subjugated under Roman rule began to assert themselves, carving out kingdoms and territories in the space left behind. The Saxons, the Picts, the Scots, each one an untamed force, now free to reclaim what had been taken from them, returned with a vengeance. The land that had once been unified under the imperial banner of Rome was now splintering, breaking apart into smaller warring factions. What was once a vibrant and orderly province now became a place of uncertainty, chaos, and struggle for survival. The roads, once built to carry the legions to victory, were now abandoned. The great Roman fortresses that had stood as symbols of invincibility became hollow shells, their walls no longer providing protection, but standing as empty, useless remnants of an empire that had long since passed. The city of Londinium, once the lifeblood of Roman Britain, now lay in ruin. The public baths, where citizens once gathered in the grandeur of Roman culture, were now cold and empty, their luxurious mosaics cracked, their walls covered in moss. The villas that dotted the countryside, once symbols of Roman wealth and leisure, had become overgrown with brambles, their once pristine marble now chipped and cracked, their foundations sinking into the earth. It was a landscape that had been utterly transformed, not by progress, but by decay. And yet, amid the crumbling ruins, there is something enduring. The Roman legacy did not simply vanish with the departure of their legions. The very architecture of Roman Britain, the roads, the towns, the military forts, had laid the foundation for what would come next. These structures, though slowly being reclaimed by nature, still carried within them the memory of Rome. The engineering feats that the Romans accomplished in Britain, roads that stretched for miles, aqueducts, defensive walls, continued to influence the way people lived in the centuries that followed. The laws of Rome, though forgotten in name, lived on in spirit, in the very structure of governance that would eventually emerge from the ashes of the empire. Rome had left behind not just stones and roads, but a deep cultural footprint that could not easily be erased. In the absence of Roman order, Britain faced a new, more uncertain reality. Local tribes, now free from Roman control, had to adapt to a world that no longer offered the protection or structure the Romans had provided. These people, some of them descendants of those who had once resisted Roman conquest, now had to come together, forging alliances and creating new power structures out of the remnants of Roman Britain. It was a time of fragmentation, but also of adaptation. The once glorious Roman cities that had stood as beacons of civilization were slowly swallowed by the land, but in their place, new forms of society began to emerge. The remnants of Roman Britain would eventually give way to the early medieval kingdoms that would shape the future of the British Isles. And yet, even as Roman Britain faded from memory, its influence could still be felt in the kingdoms that followed. The cities and towns of the post-Roman world were built upon the infrastructure laid by the Romans. The roads that stretched across the land were used by new kings and rulers who took advantage of the empire's old network to expand their reach. The castles and fortifications that replaced Roman military camps still followed Roman principles of defense. The concept of urban planning, with its organized streets and structures, continued to echo the layout of Roman towns. Even the remnants of Roman villas, though largely abandoned, still served as models for future generations of builders. But there is also a sadness in the legacy of Roman Britain, a melancholy beauty in the ruins that remain. The empire that had once believed itself invincible, that had sought to conquer the known world, now lies in pieces. The grand vision of Rome, which once sought to impose order and civilization on the barbarous wilds of the British Isles, has been replaced by smaller, fragmented kingdoms, each one vying for control, each one creating its own sense of identity. The world that Rome had built is now gone, and in its place is a world that is still searching for meaning, still struggling to rebuild. The fall of Roman Britain is the story of a civilization that reached for greatness, only to find that even the mightiest empires are bound by the same fate as all things. They rise, they flourish, and they eventually fall. But in that fall, in that collapse, there is something enduring, a lesson about the nature of power, about the fragility of human ambition, and about the cycles of history that repeat themselves over and over again. The Roman Empire, for all its power and glory, could not escape the inevitable passage of time. It is a sobering reminder that nothing lasts forever, and that even the most magnificent civilizations are ultimately swept away by the forces of nature, of time, and of human nature. As we look upon the ruins of Roman Britain, we are reminded of the transience of all things. The roads, the cities, the monuments, once symbols of Roman power and might, are now nothing more than relics of a bygone age. But in these relics, there is a beauty that transcends time. In their decay, we see the resilience of the human spirit, the ambition to create, to build, and to leave a mark upon the world. The fall of Roman Britain is not simply the end of an empire. It is a reminder that in every end, there is the potential for a new beginning. The world moves forward, and the lessons of the past are carried with us, shaping the future in ways we can never fully understand.